Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. So today we're going to do January's wrap up. I kind of have been putting this off because I have so many books on this list. I read 26 books in January, which is basically a record for me. I don't know that I have ever read that many books before, and I think that it really comes down to I just kind of went bonkers on audiobooks. I discovered the Libby app with my library, finally got that working, and I kept getting all these books coming in, and I'm like, well, gotta listen to that, and I don't know, it was a good audiobook month for me. So 13 of these books were audiobooks that I read. The others were either read on my Kindle or physically. So let us go ahead and get started with the breakdown of the stats. So these are all romance. If you're new here, I pretty much this month I only read romance. So I had 13 historical romance, 5 fantasy romance, 7 contemporary romance, and 1 sci-fi romance. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and we're going to I also had 1 DNF, which isn't included in the 26 books. I didn't rate it, I don't count it as read, but I do have a DNF I want to talk about. So we're going to start with my DNF, and then we're going to go if I have any 1 stars, and then move our way up to 5 stars. So at the very end we'll have all my 5-star reads, the reads that I really recommend. We're going to try and go through this quickly so I don't have a really long video. I also am starting a 5+ star. So I have 5-star reads that were sometimes maybe 4.5 or a solid 5-star read. And then I have ones on another tier that are 5+, which are books that I will probably never shut up about, and you're going to hear me talking about them all the time. So we'll go ahead and get started with the book that I DNF'd. So the book that I DNF'd was Breaking Perfect, and this book was, this book didn't work for me, and I'm going to tell you specifically why it didn't work for me, and this may be a spoiler, so if you are interested in reading this, this is a menage book with a married couple and then his ex-lover who comes into the story. So if you are at all interested in reading this, and you don't want any spoilers, then maybe fast forward a little bit, but if I had known this was in this book, I never would have picked it up in the first place, so I'm going to go ahead and say what it is. So this book is Mason and Libby. They're a married couple. They have really a picture-perfect life on the outside, but on the inside, Libby is really struggling with some OCD issues, and their marriage, while on the surface appears happy, they both are definitely feeling unfulfilled and things like that. There is a moment in this book where Libby and Mason are talking about their marriage, and Mason is very clear about how devoted he is to Libby, how much he loves and adores her, and he's very firm about her being faithful to him and making sure that she is just his. So it was a really wonderful little declaration about how devoted he was to her and how devoted they were in their marriage. So in comes Sean, who is Mason's ex-lover, and Libby has no idea who he is and how he's connected to Mason. The thing that made me DNF this is before the menage gets started and all parties agree on what is happening, Mason has a moment with Sean that is basically cheating, and it is never disclosed to Libby before she makes the decision to be okay with the menage. And I really did not like that, and this happened pretty much right after Libby and Mason had both agreed that their marriage was going to be a one of fidelity, and they were super devoted and really loving towards one another, and it just really rubbed me the wrong way. And because that happened so close right next to when they had just both professed their love and devotion to one another, it actually ended up being that Libby had a moment of indiscretion with Sean too, but she did tell Mason about that. But Mason never told Libby anything about that before they started their menage relationship. And that was just something that upset me so much that I could not get on board with this menage type of relationship when I knew that that's how it began. So I decided to DNF this because I knew if I read it, I was gonna give it a low rating, and it just wasn't gonna be for me. So I know a lot of people do love this, but it just definitely wasn't for me, and that is why. So let's move along to my 1-star reviews. I actually have one 1-star review this month. Okay, let's break it down to how many books that I have by ratings before we get into that. So I actually have 1 star, 3 stars, 9 4 stars, 13 5 stars. Some of those are going to be in the 5+ stars, but I had a fantastic reading month as far as I was really just loving and enjoying all the books that I was reading. And if you've watched my vlogs at all, you probably noticed that just about in every vlog I was like, hey, I found a new favorite. So those are going to be in my 5+ star reads. So the 1 star read that I have is That Scandalous Evening by Christina Dodd. This book was it had such an interesting premise where we have the heroine who, when she was young and just coming out in her season, she was also an artist, and she was really struck with this man, I can't even remember his name, Lord Blackburn, was just really kind of struck and amazed with him, just totally hero worshipping him, basically. He's basically her muse, and so she ends up sculpting this nude sculpture of him just from her imagination. She'd never seen him before. And a friend of hers decides to bring it to the Tun and unveil it one night so that she will essentially be ruined, because the idea is that she obviously must have seen him naked in order to sculpt that. So she ends up being ruined, and she kind of gets doomed to spinsterhood, and 10 or 11 years pass, and the heroine ends up being she has her sister's daughter who ends up being her ward. And so her niece is out, it's her season, and so the heroine, whose name, I can't remember, Jane, is helping her niece come out in society and find a match. So then Jane ends up meeting Lord Blackburn again, and they have this very... I guess it's a love affair because it's a romance, but honestly, I just really, really, really did not like this one. This was another one of those books where something in here was just a deal breaker for me, and I couldn't see the merits of anything else in this book. And it was really all about how there were several scenes where the hero was basically forcing himself on her, was forcing pleasure on her, and she took that as her sign to, it was an honor to be able to do this for him. It was really, really, really distasteful for me. I felt like their relationship didn't have any type of love at all. It was very uncomfortable. The love scenes in this were really icky to read. I just did not like this. There was no respect for the hero, for the heroine. It was a big no. I have a whole rant review in my vlog about this. It's in like the last 15 minutes. But yeah, this one, I did not like it, and I have no desire to read from this author ever again. Okay, I did not have any 2-star reads for this month, so let's go ahead and move on into my 3-star reads. And the first 3-star read that I want to talk about is Mr. Cavendish, I presume, by Julia Quinn. This is part of a duet by Julia Quinn, and this whole story is really pretty interesting, where we follow these two cousins, I guess, essentially, who they're trying to decide which one of them is the actual duke who's going to have claim to the title and the property. And this one we follow Thomas, who they believe is the duke at the time, and his love story with a woman that he's been betrothed to for his whole life. I really enjoy Julia Quinn's writing. I think she does such a good job of creating such a fun, readable, fast-paced, wonderful world. But this one just sort of fell a little bit flat for me in that I wasn't a huge fan of the hero. I felt like he wasn't my type of hero. He wasn't really nice to the heroine, and this one was just a lot more dark and broody than I really wanted, and I just didn't love it for that reason. But I still think it was a fun read. I just liked the other one in this duet a lot better, which we'll talk about in a minute. Another 3-star read that I have, and this one was actually a 3.5-star read, is The Gilded Web by Mary Bellog. I really ended up enjoying this, even though at one point I was going to DNF this. This book follows Alex and Edmund. Alex is the heroine in this, and this has a pretty interesting startup in that she's just walking to, I believe, a ball or something one night, and she ends up being kidnapped by these guys who think she's somebody else that they're trying to protect from getting an engagement that they don't want to happen. They don't realize that it's actually Alex who they kidnap. So they kidnap her, take her to their place, and tie her to the bedpost. And Edmund finds out what these people have done on behalf of his brother, and he's pretty upset. Edmund comes to rescue her, and in order to save her from being ruined, proposes marriage to her. This book was really slow to start for me. It wasn't that the writing style was hard to read, but it was definitely a little bit dull. It was really filled with a lot of detailed descriptions, and it was definitely sort of a slower read for me. but there were so many beautiful passages in this book that really said so much about Alex really blossoming out of her wallflower role and becoming this independent woman who wanted to make her own choices and was tired of seeing her family, especially her father, put her in this box and force her to be someone she didn't want to be. Clearly, I loved a lot of the lines in here that had a lot to say about that, and I enjoyed that so much that I gave this a 3.5 stars. I really kind of debated, is it a 3, is it a 4? But honestly, the pure amount of work it took to read this, it was really not super readable. It kind of bumped it down to 3.5, but again, I am definitely interested in reading more from Mary. This was my first Mary Bellog book. It was beautifully done, and just, I am really impressed with her skill as a writer. This one was just a little bit hard for me to really get sucked into the whole time. And the next book that I have that is a 3-star read is Master of Crows by Grace Draven. So this book is a fantasy romance, and it follows Martise and Silhara. Martise is a spy who has been sent to go and capture Silhara, who is this powerful sorcerer. It's really pretty risky for her and things, but she sort of has to go and do this to fulfill her obligations. And this is very much a hate to love fantasy romance. There's a lot of hate in this book, and I really honestly didn't just... So, I was really torn about this book because I really love Grace Draven. I really loved Radiance. It's one of my favorite books ever. I'd heard really good things about this and I had really high hopes for it. And I feel like the fantasy world in this was really beautifully made and well put together. But the romance honestly just kind of fell a little flat for me. And I feel like that can often happen to me with fantasy romance. Sometimes it's either lacking on the fantasy or lacking on the romance. And this one just felt like I just wasn't fully on board with their romance, and a lot of that was because Martise is so immediately struck with Silhara. She is really just drawn to him, his power, his whole aura, and just the way he looks. She is just struck with him. She falls for him very quickly, whereas Silhara really didn't fall for her at all. Over and over again in this book, he talks about how unattractive she is, and how undesirable that she is, except for the sound of her voice. He is so drawn to the sound of her voice. That is something that he finds really attractive, and so I felt like that had the potential to really be a wonderfully beautiful love story, but it just never quite got past that stage of him just being attracted to her against his better judgment because she just was so unattractive, and I just didn't really love that. So, I mean, this wasn't a bad read, and I definitely know people who love this read, but the romance in it specifically did not work for me at all, and so I ended up giving it 3 stars. I definitely want to keep reading more of Grace Draven, and I have one of her other books in here too that I read that I really enjoyed. Okay, and on to the 4-star reads. The first 4-star read that I have, which really was probably more like a 4.5, is Ice Planet Barbarians. This is the first time that I read this book. This is a sci-fi alien romance where women on Earth are captured and taken hostage by aliens for really dark, nefarious purposes. Their ship ends up crash landing on an ice planet, which is where the barbarians live, and the heroine ends up meeting a barbarian who comes and rescues her. I completely loved this book. It was such a fun thriller ride. I just read it in one sitting, read it, couldn't stop, and now I'm a huge fan of the series. It was honestly just so good, so enjoyable, and now I can totally see why people rave about this because I freaking loved it. It was pretty much perfect for me. Alright, let's move into the 4-star reads that I have. So the first... Okay, the next 4-star read that I have is The Lost Duke of Wyndham by Julia Quinn. This is the companion novel to Mr. Cavendish, I presume. This one follows a different hero who is actually a highwayman who doesn't know what his heritage is and that he might be the Duke. This book was so much fun and just so enjoyable. This, I feel like, was a classic Julia Quinn, just her fun, bantery, fast-paced, swoony, romantic. I just really, really loved this, and looking back on this, I probably would rate this a 4.5 star, maybe? I don't know. It was just a really fun time. Super enjoyed this one. The next 4-star read that I have is Night Song by Beverly Jenkins. This is Beverly Jenkins' first historical romance. So this is about Kara, who is a school teacher, and her love story with Chase, who is a sergeant in the Union Army. Kara has some really hard feelings towards the Union soldiers, and because of what happened in the beginning of this book, I would say there's a definite trigger warning for this book for miscarriage and lynching. And so when she meets Chase, she's really not quite sure how she feels about him, and she takes a really long time to warm up to him. Chase, on the other hand, just really loved her and was pretty relentless in his pursuit of her. I feel like this is just such a classically beautiful Beverly Jenkins book where the love story was so old-fashioned and lovely. I just really enjoyed this. There were a few things in here that kind of made me put it to a 4-star, but overall I think if you want to start with her first book, I definitely would recommend it if you can get on with those trigger warnings, because it was a very impressive debut book. It was just so good and proves what a queen Beverly Jenkins is. Just really enjoyed this one. Okay, the next 4-star read that I read was The Rogue Not Taken by Sarah MacLean. This is the first book in her Scandal and Scoundrel series, which is the books we are reading for the Rake Appreciation Society book club that I host with Jen from the Book Refuge. So our live show for these books will be on February 27th, and then on February 28th we will have Sarah MacLean on the show with us. I gave this book 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. It felt like it had all of the classic Sarah MacLean items that I really love about her writing. It had a really sort of bonkers opening that was fast-paced, really got you into the story. It had a very strong heroine. It had a very broody hero who gets completely gone for the heroine in the end, and I ended up really enjoying this. This is not my favorite of Sarah MacLean's book, but it was still a really worthy addition to all of her writings, the books that I've read, and I definitely enjoyed it. We'll definitely talk more about this in our live show. Alright, the next 4-star book that I have is The Professional by Cressley Cole. This is a contemporary romance. It is a dark contemporary romance that follows a heroine who is the daughter of a Russian mob boss when a Russian mafia protector comes to keep her safe and take her home to her father, who she doesn't even know that's her father, and it is the story of them falling in love. This is a very steamy book. This was really very intriguing. This has a classic Cressley alpha hero who at the end is a complete pile of squish for the heroine, and I really enjoyed this. I didn't love this as much as her Immortals After Dark series, but this was a really fun read. It was very fast-paced. It was a 10 out of 10 on the Steam level too. And the next 4-star read that I have is Dirty Filthy Rich Men. This was a surprising read for me because this was one I did with my friend Katie from Katie McPike. She picked this for me because it has tropes in here that I do not like. This is a bully romance. It has an alpha hole hero, and it is also a little bit of an office romance. This follows our heroine who starts college, and she is very taken with this man. So she really has this crush on Wes, who is at her college, and she goes to these parties where he is frequently at. She's met there one night by Donovan, who is the teacher's assistant in one of her classes, and he sort of confronts her with saying, you know, you're really not in his league. He likes a certain type of woman, and it's not you. He doesn't go for virgins, and all this other stuff. So she ends up having this sort of moment with Donovan where she's almost assaulted and he ends up saving her. They have this really passionate connection that is also very hate to love too. And many years pass after that first connection and they end up coming back together and meeting when they are working at the same office. This book was really pretty fascinating. I was very impressed with how drawn into the story that I was for being tropes that I really didn't like, and I definitely want to read the next book in this series. So if you like a dark romance with some CNC elements that is definitely a bully romance, hate to love, alpha hole, then maybe check this one out. It was definitely out of my comfort zone, and I actually really did enjoy it, so I am interested in reading the second one. Okay, the next book that I have to recommend is Snow Spells. This is a fantasy romance novella. It is set in winter. It has a lot of really fun, unique elements. I would say this is sort of a blend of a historical romance meets a fantasy romance. I really enjoyed this. It was a very fun and short read. This follows the heroine who wants to be a magician, but in this world where they are in, it sounds like it's sort of like a parallel England. It's called England. In this society, women are left in the role of politicians, whereas men are the only ones who are able to wield magic. So the heroine ends up figuring out how to wield magic on her own anyway, but there is this big scandal that rips her of her magic so she's not able to use it anymore, which also ends up resulting in her breaking off her engagement with her fiancé. She ends up stuck in a snowbound cabin in the Elven Woods and meets an elven lord who proposes a deal that he will help her sort of get her magic back if she finds one of their rogue magicians who is causing a lot of chaos and is responsible for the big snowfall. This book was really quietly beautiful and really fun, and I really loved sort of the subtle threads of magic interwoven into what seems to be like a Regency romance. I really enjoyed this, and if you're looking for a short fantasy romance that has historical romance vibes, I would highly recommend this. Okay, and the next 4-star book that I have is Secrets of a Summer Night, which is the first book in the Wallflower series by Lisa Kleypas. This book follows Annabelle, who is very down on her luck. Her father has passed away, and they are basically running out of money, her and her mother and her brother. So it ends up being on Annabelle's shoulders to secure a very financially successful marriage. But so a few seasons has passed and nobody has asked for her hand because she has no dowry to offer them. She ends up meeting Simon, who is a self-made billionaire, I'm not sure exactly what the term would be, but he is self-made, very financially successful, but doesn't have the title that is regarded in the peerage in England. And he really, really wants her. And I just really enjoyed this book. I felt like it was so fun to read. I loved seeing the origins of the wallflower concept. I just am in love with Lisa Kleypas writing. I thought this was pretty fantastic. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. Okay, and the next 4-star book that I have is Phoenix Unbound by Grace Draven. I was honestly very, very impressed with this book. It was very clever. It was very smart. I felt like the fantasy world in here was so beautifully built, and it was just, honestly, I just keep thinking, like, this is such a smartly put together fantasy world. I just really enjoyed this. So the whole concept of this is we have the heroine, who is Jeline, who is basically a phoenix. In her town, every year there is this opposing kingdom requires the sacrifice of a human woman who they burn at the stake. Jeline ends up being that woman for the last few years. She's chosen for that because she can survive the flame and sort of hide her identity so nobody knows who she is. But she ends up being caught by Azarian, who is the Empire's most famous gladiator, and he ends up realizing that's what's happening with Jeline, and he catches her and they sort of make this bargain. So this book was, this was honestly such a really compelling fantasy world, and the reason I gave it 4 instead of 5 stars is because I felt like the fantasy world took a little bit more of the forefront than the romance did, although I really enjoyed both aspects of this. It just felt a little bit more fantasy heavy. But it was definitely like an enemies to lovers, a little bit of a darker romance. There's some sexual assault that happens in here too, but it was honestly super enjoyable. I really, really loved this book, and I can't wait to read the second book in the series. So if you're looking for a very unique, fast-paced, beautifully built fantasy romance, I would highly recommend this one. It doesn't have the same vibes at all as Radiance, which is a very quiet, soft, slow-moving romance. This one was not that, but it was just really, honestly, pretty interesting and really enjoyable, and I really loved the depth of the characters and their relationship. Okay, moving on to my 5-star reads. The first 5-star read that I have is Never Seduce Scott by Maya Banks. This is a Highlander romance, and this was so sweet and just so beautiful, and I really, really enjoyed this. This follows Eveline, who is our heroine. She is dearly loved by her parents. They regard her as just this precious treasure, which was one thing that I loved about this book so much, because I feel like it's so common in historical romance to see, like, the father or the parents who are kind of harsh and mean to the heroine and really force them into a marriage, whereas in this book, like, she was their treasure and they just really loved and adored her. She does end up being betrothed to Graham, who is a Scottish lord, I don't know how to, I always mess that up. But the interesting thing about this plot is that they believe that Evelyn is, like, touched, is what they call it. She is deaf, and so she doesn't communicate, she doesn't speak, and they consider that to be there's something wrong with her brain, that she's touched. And so when they send her to marry Graham, her father specifically says, "You are getting a treasure. You don't know what you have here with her." And this book was just so sweetly beautiful. Like, their love story was so tender, and it was so precious, and it was pretty slow moving for a historical, but it was just a beautiful thing to see, and I just honestly really loved it. I think that Graham is one of my new favorite alpha mellow heroes. He is very alpha and dominant, but he is just nothing but softness and tenderness with Eveline. It was so good. I loved it so much. And the next 5-star read book that I have is The Duke Who Didn't by Courtney Milan. I enjoyed this book so much. This was another just really sweet, really fun, very low angst, just beautiful historical romance. I loved the diversity of this in that we have a lot of Chinese immigrants who are living in this town in England. They've all kind of centered there, and they have this festival every year. I can't remember what it's called. They have this festival every year where they, I don't even exactly know what they do. They have some contest where they go and find different things that have been placed all around the town. And the love story in this follows Chloe and Jeremy, who have been childhood friends and Jeremy has just been pining for Chloe for many, many years, but he also ended up sort of leaving and going away. Little does Chloe know that Jeremy is actually the Duke of this town. He likes to keep it a secret because he doesn't feel like he's doing a great job of being the Duke and taking care of the community. But Chloe also has had feelings for him for many years. So this is a beautiful book where we have a case of mutual pining, and it was just so much fun. I loved watching their love story. I loved their banter. I loved the relationship that Chloe has with her dad. He's a single dad, and he's working on making this Asian brown sauce and trying to find fame there, and Chloe is really trying to help him do that. Chloe is definitely a little bit of a nerd, a little bit of an organizational nerd. She loves making lists, and when Jeremy comes back to try and win her hand, very subtly, he doesn't go about it directly at all, he wants her to make a list of qualities of a bride that he could find, but he wants all of those qualities to be ones that Chloe actually has. This is his way of being like, hey, I want you. This was just so cute. It was like these two dorks just falling in love, and it was just sweet and soft, and I loved it so much. This was fantastic. Okay, the next 5-star read that I have is Seduce Me at Sunrise by Lisa Kleypas. I love this book so much. I love this series, the Hathaway series. I've only read the first 2 books so far, but I dearly loved the story of Wynne and Maripen, who we meet in Mine Till Midnight. This is their story. This is another book that has a lot of mutual pining and just a lot of unrequited love. Well, on both sides, like they both just pine for each other so much. But Kev really feels like Wynne deserves better, that he isn't the man for her, and so there's a little bit of angst. Like, Kev is such an angsty hero. He loves her so much. Oh my gosh, this was just fantastic. I love this book so much. I gave this 5 stars. The next 5-star read that I have is The Raven Prince by Elizabeth Hoyt. This book was so much fun. I was very, 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 very surprised and interested in the different plots that happened in here. I feel like Elizabeth Hoyt in general, she does a really good job of making quick plotted books that make you want to keep reading them, that keep your interest, but that also have a huge impact on the romance. And I just feel like that is something that I appreciate so much that I feel like isn't done super well a lot of the time. In this book we have a widowed heroine who is trying to find employment because she's living with her mother-in-law because her husband has passed away and they're quickly running out of money. So she ends up meeting a man in town who is saying that the Duke, or the Earl of Swarningham, is in need of a secretary. And so she's like, hey, I could be that secretary, and he's a little unsure about hiring her or not because she's a woman and usually men were the ones who were hired, but he says, yeah, okay. She kind of forces him into seeing her point of view and he hires her. So she goes to meet the Earl, who is your typical Elizabeth Hoyt grumpy, damaged hero, and they have this very unique, very passionate love affair, and it was just fantastic. I loved this so much. Again, we have a very damaged, scarred hero who is broody, who doesn't really want to love the heroine, but does against his better judgment. And it's just classic Elizabeth Hoyt, and it was fabulous. I loved it. Okay, the next 5-star read book that I have is A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett St. Clair. This is a Hades and Persephone retelling, and this is a sort of like set in a more urban setting in New Athens. So it is in our current day world, but in this world, people know that gods and goddesses are out and walking among them. So this book follows Hades, who runs a very successful gambling den, and he is very well known for making bargains and debts with humans, and the humans are never able to win them. One night he ends up meeting Persephone, and they make a bargain that if she is not able to make life in the underworld, then she has to stay there with him. And it was just very, very good. It was a little bit dark, a little bit gritty. It was very fast-paced. It had a very approachable feeling to this. I really loved their romance. Hades was such a broody hero, and Persephone was not my favorite heroine that I've ever read, but she was definitely really... I was more on her side towards the end of this, and I was super invested in their romance. This was a ton of fun, and it was super steamy, and I really liked it. And the next book that I have that was 5 stars is The Heart of the Fae by Emma Hamm. This is a fantasy romance, and it is a Beauty and the Beast retelling mixed with Irish mythology. This book was so quietly beautiful. I really loved the fantasy world in this. I thought that it was so subtly and beautifully woven together with Irish mythology and the Beauty and the Beast retelling. The interesting thing about this is that our heroine is a healer and a midwife, and she's trying to save her town from the blood beetle plague that is sort of decimating her town, and it has recently affected her father. She ends up meeting the elf lords, and they tell her that if she goes to find their lost and forgotten king, that she will be able to find the cure for this disease. So she travels to meet and find this king, who is our Beast character, and she hopes to find the cure there. This is a very slow burn romance. It is an adult romance, but it is also very slow and doesn't hit you until right at the very end. But it was so honestly beautiful, and the romance that we got in here was so satisfying, and I was so completely on board with this Beast character who was such a noble and a good man, and I just really loved him. And the interesting thing about Beast's character is that the Beast aspect that he has is that whenever his skin is pierced, like crystals erupt from his skin, so he kind of has like a geode effect, which I thought was really cool and really unique. And I am just a sucker for Irish mythology too. I really enjoyed this one, and I want to keep reading in this series. Okay, moving on to my 5+ star. So these are the reads that I would say are my favorite reads of the month, and they are ones that I just will gush about nonstop, that I just dearly, dearly loved, and I hope that you, if you're going to pick any of these books out, I would really love it if you picked some of these up, if you haven't already. So I have 7 5+ star reads, which I think is just kind of outstanding that I had that many books that I just loved so much in the month, and the first one is Birthday Girl by Penelope Douglas. I have tried to read Penelope Douglas before, and I have never really been a fan of her work. I sort of have felt like it just didn't jive with me, and I think that was probably more due to the type of books that I was picking up, in that I started with Corrupt, and I just feel like that was a little too hate to love for me. So after a lot of people, a lot of you recommended Birthday Girl to me, I finally picked it up, and I am so glad that I did, because I freaking love this book so much. This was my first book of the year, and this is a book that I can see myself rereading over and over again. I just loved it so much. It was fantastic. I feel like everybody knows about this book, but in case you don't, and in case you too have been on the fence with Penelope Douglas, I encourage you to pick this book up, because it was fantastic. We basically have our heroine who is sort of, she has a boyfriend, she's young, she's 19, this is an age gap romance, and she's really in some financial misery, and she's sort of worried about her financial future. So her and her boyfriend decide to move in temporarily with her boyfriend's dad, who is Pike, our hero. This one, I was a little worried about this because I was afraid there was going to be cheating, which if you saw my DNF, you will know I hate cheating. I am not here for it. I don't want to read about cheating ever. But there was literally 0 cheating in here. This wasn't a dark romance like I also thought it might be. This is a little bit, I would say it's a very light taboo romance, and it was just so freaking good. I loved it so dang much. One of my favorite books ever, and now I need to find every physical copy that exists of it in different covers because I love it so much. Okay, the next book that we have is The Earl Takes All by Lorraine Heath. This was so freaking good. I love this book so much. This book follows a heroine who is pregnant and she's expecting a baby, and her husband goes on this trip to Africa, like a safari, with his twin brother. While he's in Africa on safari, he is killed, and the twin brother, not her husband, comes home and decides that he's going to pretend to be her husband instead of the brother, because she has had a miscarriage, and it's very important that she carry this baby to term because it will be an heir if it's a boy. And her husband's dying wish to her brother was that he take care of his wife. So you can see that has the potential to go bad, like, pretty quickly, and I honestly was, like, a little bit nervous, like, is this gonna be believable? But I gotta tell you, I was on board with their romance from page 1. I freaking loved it. I was just obsessed with these characters. I was obsessed with this book. This was one of those books that I literally could not put down. I read it from start to finish. It was just so good. There was so much passion and so much love and so much longing, and it was just perfect. I loved it. Can't wait to read more. The next 5-star read that I have is my last read of the month, actually, and that is Dreaming of You by Lisa Kleypas. I have an entire reading vlog dedicated to how I feel about this book and the hero Derek Craven specifically. This book was predicted to be 5 stars for me by Jen from the Book Refuge, and I just completely loved it. It is a 5+ star. This is my favorite Lisa Kleypas book to date. I loved everything about this. So we have Derek Craven, who is the hero, and then we also have Sarah, who is our heroine, who is a writer. She writes novels about prostitutes and things like that, the darker side of London. She's a very well-known writer. She ends up coming to a casino one night to research for her next book, and this casino is owned by Derek Craven. She ends up seeing him being accosted by these 2 men. When she sees them pull a knife on him, she immediately gets her gun out of her purse and shoots one of the guys and saves him. And it is their very complicated, very beautiful, very... my heart aches about this love story, honestly. Like, I see what the hype is about. I love this book so much. This is my exact type of alpha hero that I love. It was fantastic. Can't recommend this highly enough. Although I will say, I know some people don't jive with Derek Craven, but I definitely do. He was fantastic. I loved their romance. Okay, and now we're on to some of my very favorite books of the month. I definitely went on a little bit of a Kennedy Ryan binge. I just really was feeling like reading more of her books. I just started reading Kennedy Ryan last year, and I started with Queen Move, which is the spin-off, sort of this duet. So I wanted to go back and see what I thought about these two. So I started with The Kingmaker, which is about Lennox, who is she's a Native American woman, and she starts out in this book, she's 17. She's protesting where people are trying to drill and tear up her sacred land. And she ends up meeting Maxim there, who is the son of the man responsible who wants to drill for oil in this Native American land. She doesn't, however, know that that's who he is. They have this very electric first meeting, and both of these books go through their life. It spans the course of many years, ups and downs, has some elements of romantic suspense, a ton of longing, just some complete soulmates here. Just, oh my gosh, I loved this book so much. I loved these books. If I had to pick one of these two, I would say I almost think I like The Rebel King better, but they were both 5+ star reads. I loved them so much. Lennox and Maxim have the type of love that I feel like you don't come across in romance novels very often, one that really conquers all. It really makes you feel hope in the power of love and realize that love really can conquer all, and it was just so beautiful and so powerful, and I really can't adequately express how much I loved these books. I feel like they're very timely. I feel like they're just honestly powerful, and they're just so gut-wrenchingly passionate and romantic, and I just loved them so much. The way that Maxim loves Lennox and how desperate he is to do anything for her and how she is such an equal partner to him was just a thing of beauty, and I loved it so much. Love these books. And the last 2 books that I have are Flow and Grip, the first 2 books in the Grip trilogy by Kennedy Ryan. Oh, this is again another case of just a completely epically beautiful, swoony romance that just spans the course of years, that is proof and evidence that love conquers all, especially when we have 2 people who really seem to not be able to make a good match, which is the same case with the Kingmaker series. In this book, we have Grip, who is a black man, who is a musician, who is a rapper, and is on this road to great success when they first meet in Flow. And we have Bristol, who is basically a pretty much just a really rich girl. Her family has a lot of money, but she's always often felt like she wasn't a priority to them, and she has had a lot of sort of some feelings of loss and grief because her brother moved away and he was emancipated from his parents, and so she goes to visit him in LA, and when she's there she ends up meeting Grip. Now the story starts when they're, I think, 19. They're very young. They end up having 2 weeks of a beautifully passionate, amazing love story, and then they're separated from something that really pulls them apart, and they don't come to meet each other until we start Grip again. And it's really the story of them struggling to overcome everything in their life, the things that people have to deal with in their lives today, but it also has an added layer of that Bristol is a white woman and Grip is a black man, and it's really seeing how they can make this work when there's so many different things that may be pulling them apart just because of the races that they are. There are a lot of, oh gosh, this book is just so beautiful. I'm currently reading the last one still, so I don't want to give anything away, but this is the bind-up, the paperback bind-up, so it has all three of them in one. But it is just such a beautifully moving, relatable, sweep you away type of romance. I loved it so freaking much, and I keep trying to decide which one I like better. Like, which of these couples is my favorite, because I love them both so much. So if I had to choose and say what my favorite books of the month were, I would say it's these Kennedy Ryan books. These are books that are going to stay with me forever, that I'm going to reread over and over again, that are just going to stay in my heart forever. I love them so much. So, I think that's everything. Thank you for sticking with me with this very long wrap-up. I have toyed with the idea of doing a mid-month wrap-up, so I may do that for February so my wrap-ups aren't so freaking long. But anyway, if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate all of you. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll be seeing you in my next video.